Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caroline Colas. I am the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Today, we're going to be speaking about emotional intelligence together with positive psychology, using emotional intelligence to navigate these challenging times with Laura Belson. What is social and emotional intelligence, and how does it support the principles of positive psychology? How can social and emotional intelligence help us better navigate these challenging times? How can it help us be better leaders, forge stronger relationships, and manage our emotional responses more effectively? In this session, Dr. Laura Belson will lead a conversation about the best strategies to leverage and improve our social and emotional intelligence to create better long-term relationships, gain clarity, and feel more grounded and positive to help us navigate through this pandemic. A little bit about Laura. She earned her PhD in human communication with an emphasis on leadership and organizational communication from the University of Denver. She's calling in today from Colorado, and she is the author of The Social and Emotional Intelligence Profile, as well as the founder of the Institute for Social and Emotional Intelligence, an international research and educational organization. As an executive leadership coach in private practice and the CEO partnership coaching executives and organizations, she helps leaders from around the world thrive and flourish using positive psychology principles and techniques. She has held numerous leadership positions in her career and has also served on the faculty of the University of Denver for over 17 years, teaching graduate courses in leadership and communication. She's a graduate of the Whole Being Certificate in Positive Psychology, the CIP program, and is a certified positive psychology coach through Mentor Coach and holds the designation of Master Certified Coach, MCC, from the International Coach Federation. Her happiest moments are spent spoiling her 5 children, ages 6 and under. Welcome to the call.
Thank you, Caroline. And I have to say, I have to admit, that's 5 grandchildren.
Oh, that's great.
So, but thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction.
Oh, you're welcome. So you took the CIP program. I'm in the CIP program currently.
Oh, are you loving
it? Yes, I really am.
Yeah, with Megan and Phoebe. And when I was through, Tall was also teaching.
Wonderful.
And had a great deal to do with the program. It was absolutely a fabulous year.
I agree. It's been life-changing and life-affirming, which is what I think that you're going to talk about today. And one of the reasons I'm so excited for your conversation is I think there's a lot of confusion around social and emotional intelligence. And I know that Tall talks about us having one channel, right? And that we need to feel things. But sometimes it feels like the emotions can be like an ocean. They can be overwhelming.
Yes.
My emotions can be so big. It's like, how do I reconcile how I feel with what I'm supposed to do about it? So I'm hoping you can answer some of that.
That's a big question. Very big question. But yes, we can chat about that for sure.
Awesome. Well, would you like to give us some context? Should we jump right into your, I got a chance to see your PowerPoint before the call in our warm-up session, and it's amazing. So I'm thinking that maybe what we should do for our call today is just have you jump in, give us some structure and context for our conversation, and then, have some questions at the end. How's that sound?
That sounds perfect. That sounds great. So I'm just delighted to be here, and I appreciate the invitation. And here's what I was thinking we would talk about today, but I am open to making this a conversation. We're going to do a quick overview of social and emotional intelligence, what that is. And I know you all have some ideas, and I'd love to hear those, and how we can use those skills to support our own growth and in the area of positive psychology. We're going to explore PERMA, which is, and I know you've all been exposed to that before, a newer theory of well-being. And the science. And I love this because it's the science behind what makes people thrive and flourish. And I love that picture too. And we're going to review a few practical strategies for using our emotional intelligence together with positive psychology, as Caroline was saying, to navigate these times. So I was wondering if we could maybe put in the chat, if you all would put in the chat, what do you see as being social and emotional intelligence? I'd love to get your thoughts.
Great. And then whenever you're ready, you can also share your screen and your...
Okay. Oh, am I not sharing it yet?
Not yet.
Oh, I am so sorry. Thank you for letting me know. No wonder. So here. And do you see the slideshow?
You might want to put it in, there we go. That's it.
Okay. So when I said I love this picture, nobody knew what I was talking about. So we're going to do a quick overview of social and emotional intelligence. We're going to explore PERMA. And we're going to get into a few practical strategies that we can use today.
So we're getting some input in the chat. It says, social and emotional intelligence starts with parents, from Nancy, and seeing things beyond our own perspectives and experience, from Cassie. And Mario says the ability to use one's emotions and help manage the emotions of others to have more effective relationships.
Wow, perfect.
And there you have it. Thank you for your contributions, everyone.
Excellent. Good, good, good. So yes, all of that, what you all said. And it's also being aware of our own emotions and the emotions of others, as was mentioned, in the moment, and then using that information to manage ourselves and manage our relationships. So good. Another way of looking at this is with this 4-quadrant model. And so if you see self, and we have other or social, and we have awareness, and we have management, makes up the 4 quadrants. It really comes down to this. It's about being self-aware. What's coming up for us in the moment? Being aware of other people. What's coming up for the other person? And then using that information, and it's a very valuable source of information if we pay attention to it, to then manage ourselves and manage our relationships with others. So beautiful, beautiful statements that everybody made. Another way, this is a little bit fuller look. Within each of the quadrants, there are specific skills like emotional self-awareness, empathy, behavioral self-control, or emotional self-control, some people call it, communication, and all the relationship management skills. We're not going to be able to go through all of those, but I want to touch on a few. Particularly in the self-awareness quadrant, emotional self-awareness. It's about paying attention to what's coming up for us. And you kind of touched on this, Caroline, when you said we're experiencing overwhelm in this period of time. And that is normal. And what's real important is to sit with that and listen for what are these emotions telling us. And they don't have to be positive emotions all the time. They'll be negative emotions, and we need to pay attention to all of them. By the way, emotions, let me just mention this too, about emotions. Emotions come to us unbidden. It's part of being human, and it's critically important to the evolution of our species. When the saber-toothed tiger wandered through caveman base camp and people felt fear, it was a good thing. It helped keep us alive. When new parents gaze in on a sleeping newborn baby and they feel this overwhelming sense of love and caring, it's a good thing. It helps keep the species alive. So emotions are normal, both the positive and negative. And the important thing is to pay attention. And let's take a look at what they're telling us. Let's take a quick look at the other awareness quadrant. Empathy, situational or organizational awareness is kind of like empathy on steroids. Some people can walk into a meeting or an organization and pick up on the emotional undercurrents. And when we have both empathy and organizational or situational awareness, we can be of service. I love the story of Aaron Fauerstein. He owned a mill in Western Massachusetts, very rural part of Massachusetts. And the mill was actually in this very old building, built wooden structure. built in the 1800s. And currently what they were manufacturing there was this polar fleece, that white fluffy down-like stuff that they put in down jackets, and they put in it's a down substitute, blankets and so on. And that's what they were making there. And one cold December night, it caught on fire. And it became a raging inferno, this fire. And this was a very small community, maybe about 3,000 people living in the area. Probably half to two-thirds of the people worked for Mr. Feuerstein. And he stood there, and the employees stood there in the parking lot watching their livelihood go up in flames. The volunteer fire department did everything they could, but it was such a raging inferno, as you might imagine, it being an old wooden structure filled with down like fluffy synthetic stuff. It just went up in flames. And he stood there shoulder to shoulder with all of these employees that came out, and the volunteer fire department, all they could really do was stand back. It was so hot. And he felt empathy, and he understood the situation and decided to be of service in that moment. And he said he knew that these people counted on him and his plant, his manufacturing facility, to feed and house and clothe their families. He also understood the situation. This town, this community, would become a ghost town if his mill went. He was the major employer. And in that moment, he decided to be of service, and he kept everyone on the payroll personally, paid their salaries for 3 months while they rebuilt. And he was named one of the top 100 best corporate citizens as a result. A fabulous story that exemplifies other awareness. Self-management. Some of you are probably familiar with these marshmallow studies. These little kids were brought into the psychology lab at Stanford University starting in the late 1960s. And they were like 4 years old. And they sat them down at these little child-sized chairs and tables. And the researcher would give them a marshmallow. The researcher would say, I need to run an errand. I'll be back in 10, 15 minutes. Here's a marshmallow. You can have this now if you want to, or if you can wait until I get back, you can have 2. And the researcher would leave and go around the corner and watch the kids through a mirror, a one-way mirror. And these little kids are so cute. You can actually see videos of them on YouTube. They would touch the marshmallow. They would squeeze the marshmallow. They would sniff the marshmallow. They would close their eyes so they wouldn't have to look at the marshmallow. Sometimes they'd get under the table. What they were after was, which of these kids have behavioral self-control, and what kind of influence does that have on their lives? And they found that those kids who could wait until the researcher came back and waited for the second marshmallow, they actually did better on their SAT scores, they did better in school, they did better in their marriages, they did better in their careers. I mean, behavioral self-control or emotional self-control, those terms are often used interchangeably. And it's important to maybe take a quick look at a distinction here. I mean, I tend to favor behavioral self-control as the term, because for a lot of people, emotional self-control suggests suppressing our emotions or dampening them down. And that's not what we're about. We want to listen to our emotions. We want to let them in and listen for what they're telling us. What we do want to do is manage our behavioral response. So in any case, these are also some of the other competencies or skills associated with self-management. Integrity, it's a choice. All of these are a choice. And I know you're familiar with Viktor Frankl's quote that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that pause lies growth and freedom, the chance, the opportunity to choose our response. And integrity, innovation and creativity, realistic optimism is one of the skills here. And we like the term realistic optimism because it's not about total optimism, Pollyanna, looking at the world through rose-colored glasses, but it is a choice to try to look on the brighter side. Resilience, I know you've been talking a lot about resilience and stress management. We could go into so much detail here, but let's move on. Relationship management, these are the skills. This is the fourth quadrant. Communication is critically important right now, and all of these skills. So with that, Caroline, do you think there are any questions yet? I know that was a real fast overview of emotional intelligence.
Well, my question is, when you were talking about behavioral control and what was the other one? Are they the same thing? Emotional?
A lot of the researchers, and forgive me, I am a recovering academic, so a lot of the researchers use the term emotional self-control or impulse control. And, you know, we can't really control our impulses. They just happen. And we can't really, I mean, we can to some degree manage our emotions, but again, they come to us unbidden. So I tend to prefer the term behavior, and I don't want people to feel like they need to control their emotions to the point where they're repressing them or stuffing them. You know, it's about, this is so important to listen to them. So I appreciate your asking for that clarification. What we can do, what is within our control, is to manage our response, our behavior, and how we respond.
I found even when you were talking about the story of the gentleman that paid his employees for 3 months, I found tears welling up in my eyes.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Yeah. And we have some choices now, even in these hard times, to serve other people. I mean, so, yeah. So
Thank you. That was really helpful. And I also wanted to just read in the chat, there were some other contributions. Sherry Kelly, Dr. Sherry Kelly says that even more than IQ, research shows that your emotional intelligence and your ability to handle feelings will determine your success and happiness, which you were covering in the marshmallow study, right?
Absolutely. And yes.
And then I know that Barbara and Terry both shared about their view of emotional intelligence, self-awareness of your own emotional triggers and regulation, then using this knowledge to understand others. And then Terry just said simply, which I think is very beautiful, connecting.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I love that. Yes. And that is so true, what Dr. Sherry said, that some of the research suggests that 2/3 to 3/4 of our success in work and in life comes from our emotional intelligence and social intelligence. We all know people, or we've met people who are off the scale brilliant, but have no ability to communicate or not their knowledge or work with people because they lack these basic, you know, social and emotional skills. So let's move ahead to positive psychology. And I know you've touched on this, I believe you have. PERMA, the PERMA theory, it's one of the theories out there associated with positive psychology, as is SPIRE, that I know you're very well aware of, that comes from the Whole Being Institute. PERMA comes from Marty Seligman. It's an acronym for positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Marty Seligman is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. I know you've had some folks on speaking to you from the MAP program, phenomenal program. Marty Seligman is considered the father of positive psychology. And in 1998, in San Francisco, he gave the keynote address to the American Psychological Association. 6,000 psychologists, all in one room, if you can imagine such a thing. Some were academics, some were practicing psychotherapists and clinicians. And he said, you know what? We've been focusing a great deal on mental illness, diagnosing mental illness, classifying it, characterizing it, and how to treat it. Mental illness and what's wrong with people. And what we really need to also be doing is taking a look at what's right with people. What a concept. Let's take a look, a scientific look, at people who are thriving and flourishing. And what are they doing that brings them to a life along the continuum toward thriving and flourishing? And teach that. I mean, it's just a wonderful, you know, positive psychology is fantastic. As a result of that, there has been a vast outpouring of scientific research on positivity, on happiness and well-being. What creates it? Why do some people seem to be happy? Does money bring happiness? And some of you may have already touched on this. There seems to be a threshold, an income threshold that we need to reach. And beyond that, and in the United States, I think it's about $78,000 or $80,000 a year. And beyond that, more money does not bring an equivalent amount of happiness. So, I mean, they're researching this as well. So let's just break down PERMA a little bit. People with positive emotions. And again, this can be a choice, as you know from Sonja Lyubomirsky's work that I know you've been exposed to. We'll touch on that too. But they get fewer colds and illnesses. They have fewer symptoms, suffer less pain. They have lower blood pressure, reduced heart disease, better blood sugar. You know, they live longer. I want to tell you, I know you've had Barbara Fredrickson on. I love her. Marty Seligman might be the father of positive psychology, but he calls Barbara Fredrickson the genius of positive psychology. So it's fantastic that you actually had her on as one of your speakers. But let's talk about Cohen and Doherty's research. They get fewer colds and illnesses. So here's a study, if you'll bear with me. They brought 299 undergraduate students into the psychology lab. It's always these poor undergraduates who get the brunt of these psychology studies. And they gave them a questionnaire. They didn't know what the questionnaire was about. They didn't know what they were being tested on. As it turns out, they were being asked to answer questions about how positive or negative they were feeling in that particular moment. And then one by one, they brought the students into the next room where they administered the rhinovirus into the nostrils of these students. I have no idea how they got this through the University Ethics Committee. They actually shot the cold virus directly up their noses. And then they said, go home, come back in 7 days. What the researchers were after is there a correlation between how positive or negative you were feeling in that particular moment and whether or not you come down with the common cold? And sure enough, there was a very high correlation. And those people who were feeling more positive came down with the common cold far less frequently than those who were feeling negative. Now, it's not a be-all, end-all, cure-all, but there is a physiological response to emotions. Emotions release a cascade of chemicals and hormones into our bodies, and that some can compromise our immune systems. When we're feeling stressed, cortisol, adrenaline, interleukins, 6K, I believe it's called. You know, these things have a dampening effect on the immune system, whereas positive emotions release dopamine and oxytocin and other good things that tend to boost the immune system. So there's a good health reason to try to choose, when we can, positivity. So this is Sonja Lyubomirsky's work. And positivity, what determines happiness? We all have a set point. About 50% of our happiness is a set point. What we're born with, how we were raised, that kind of thing. Circumstances account for about 10%, but in being intentional, in terms of choosing our response, accounts for almost 50% of our happiness. Barbara Fredrickson talks about, micro moments of positivity. It's not like we're happy all the time. That's not even sustainable. But happiness comes to us, positivity comes just in micro moments, little bursts. And we can choose to pay attention to those. We also need to be aware of false positivity, convincing ourselves that we're happy. That's just doesn't work, because we know. She also talks about a ratio in the workplace. Those workplaces that are more productive and actually even profitable tend to have a ratio of 3 positive interactions to every 1 negative in the workplace. And John Gottman's work, he's a professor at the University of Washington, professor emeritus now, he's retired. He was able to take a look at video of couples and determine within 5 minutes of watching their interactions whether or not they would still be married in 2 to 3 years. And one of the things that he came up with was that the positive to negative in marriages needs to be 5-1. So, okay, back to PERMA. That's positivity. E is engagement, complete concentration, clarity about our goals. We lose track of time. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, it's a mouthful, Hungarian psychology professor at Claremont University in California, wrote a book called Flow. And as he was just opening up the book, he describes a person who is out there at 7 a.m. ready to, on a Saturday morning, going to climb a rock face, this big, huge rock wall. And he's got his ropes and he's got his pitons and he's got his sandwich tucked in the back of his shirt, and he starts out climbing up this wall. And he is so focused and concentrating so hard. And he reaches the top, and it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And, you know, more than half the day has gone by. And he just totally lost track of time because he was so engaged in what he was doing. People who thrive and flourish tend to be far more engaged in their lives, in their work, in their personal lives than people who are not thriving and flourishing. Engagement. Relationships. I want to spend a little time on this. This is huge. For one thing, this is the #1 predictor of well-being. For another thing, relationships are a little more challenging during this pandemic time. But this is about social support, which is so hard when we're experiencing social distancing. I like to think we're experiencing physical distancing and hopefully not so much social distancing. But this is a belief that we're cared for, that we're loved and valued. And this is a need that's biologically wired into us. And they're just very beneficial to our lives. Let's talk about a little. Brené Brown, you're probably familiar with some of her work. She sees connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. And Matthew Lieberman wrote this: the need to connect socially with others is as basic as our need for food, water, and shelter. And Sarah Pressman at the University of California at Irvine says the probability of dying early is 20% higher for obese people, 30% higher for excessive drinkers, 50% higher for smokers, but an incredible 70% higher for people with poor social relationships. This is so critically important to thriving and flourishing. Some of you may have heard about the Rosito effect. Rosito is a little town in Pennsylvania, eastern Pennsylvania. And in the 1960s, most of the people living there were of Italian-American descent, and they were a very close-knit community. They would get together all the time for meals and bocce ball, and they were just, you know, and they ate too much, and they drank too much, and they smoked, and they had no heart disease. And the doctor in the town, a community of about 2,000 people, the doctor in the town had a visit from a friend, a colleague of his from the CDC, then they got to talking about it. And, you know, the incidence of heart disease was so low. It was, you know, a fraction of what the national average was, despite these lifestyle choices. And what they found was that it was because of the relationships that they lived so long and so well. And things changed a little in this community when some of the older folks passed on and newer people moved in, and the social connections, the close social connections, were lost. Some of you have probably heard about the 75-year Harvard study. In 1937, 1938, the researchers started this study, and they took all the sophomores of Harvard, and they were all men at the time because the only people that were admitted to Harvard in the 1930s were men, and they tracked them for 75 years. This is like unheard of in terms of studies today, that it could go on for so long. But they tracked their physical and emotional health, actually for more than 80 years. Blood samples, brain scans, psychological testing, all kinds of things. And what they found was that those individuals who were thriving and flourishing, the clearest message, according to the director, the fourth director of the study that we get from this 75-year study is this: good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. So this one is so critically important. Back to PERMA, M is for meaning. This is about having a sense of purpose in our lives, serving something greater than ourselves. And when we contribute to the lives of others, we experienced enhanced physical health and a sense of well-being. Here in Colorado, we have some high mountain passes that go up over 10,000 feet, 11,000 feet. And the only time when you can work on these roads is in the summer. And they're typically, 2-lane roads. And so when the workers are working on these roads, they often have to stop traffic. And they'll work on one side of the road and they stop traffic on the other side. And so you've got the flag people there who say, you got to stop and you got to wait, 10 minutes while we let the other people go. And this guy comes up, drives up, he's got his window down, and he says to the flag man, he's just annoyed. I mean, here he is in this long line of cars. The guy puts the stop sign up right in front of him. He's annoyed, and he just decides to take it out on this poor flag person. And he says, you must hate your job. How can you stand doing this work? This has to be the most boring thing to do on the planet. How can you stand it? And the flagman says, actually, it's not a bad job at all. He said, look around. I mean, this is beautiful. Beautiful Colorado sunshine, these mountain views, the wildflowers out, in the meadows. And you see those guys over there? They're my buddies. I'm working to protect and keep them safe. He had a real sense of meaning in his life and from his work. And we can always find a sense of meaning. A stands for accomplishment. And this is kind of like the gift that keeps on giving. The process of working toward a goal is just as important as its attainment. But people who can look back on their lives and say, I accomplished something, tend to be people who are thriving and flourishing. So the question now, how are we doing on time? We're doing okay, huh, Caroline? Yeah.
We're doing good.
Okay. So social and emotional intelligence and positive psychology. How do you bridge this gap? What does one have to do with the other? Are there any comments, or Caroline, and now that we finished PERMA? I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff out.
No, the biggest comment or question is, can we get a copy of her slides with the recording?
Sure.
Great.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Happy to do that. So what does one have to do with the other? And how do we bridge that gap? And I know that all of you, Caroline was telling me before the call, you're all, kind of bridging a gap here now. Caroline was telling me up on the Upper West Side that 4 hotels have started taking in homeless people. And I mean, we're not only bridging the gap between social and emotional intelligence, positive psychology, but we're forging whole new ground and bridging huge gaps between what was our normal and who knows what the next normal is going to be. And I'm so tired of hearing the term new normal. But in any case, we're all wrestling with how do we get from here to there, and who do we want to be, and how do we want to be as we go through this. So here are some things to ponder. And I know all of you have many of these skills already. But self-awareness in the social and emotional intelligence realm is foundational. Once again, we need to be self-aware. We can't be aware of what's going on for another person if we're not aware of what's going on within us. We also can't manage ourselves if we're not aware of what's going on within us. So we need to listen to our emotions, whether positive or negative, because they're telling us some things. They're giving us important information. Empathy, we're going to talk a little about empathy. It's critical. I have a note here, there's pain in every room. When I was teaching at the University of Denver for 17 years. I taught graduate seminars in leadership and communication. And they were adult learners. My students, our students in that part of the university they were between the ages of 30 and 60. They were on their way to earning a master's degree. They already had their bachelor's. They were working. They had really busy, active professional lives and personal family lives. And they were fitting in their education, usually in the evenings, in between, very busy and active personal and professional lives. And what I came to find in these graduate seminars, we would typically have 15, 18, 20, maybe as many as 25 in the room, in a classroom. And this was still when we did things face-to-face. But I learned that in every room, every classroom, people were struggling. There were some people who were dealing with financial difficulties, marital troubles, a child, an adolescent who had an eating disorder or other kinds of disorders, or they had an aging parent that they were caring for. Maybe they were struggling at work or were just laid off, but there was pain in every room. And so walking into a room, the message is, we never know what someone else is going through. And we need to be kind. We need to have empathy, and we need to listen, because they just might need that. Emotional self-control is the next one. It's a choice. Again, we can choose to react, or we can choose a response. Again, Viktor Frankl's quote, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, we can pause and choose a response. And in this space of COVID, we can also choose our response. We need to listen for what's coming up for us. We need to practice empathy toward others, but we choose our response. And then managing relationships is critically important. So this is where we're going to get into some practical strategies. Enough of the academic theory stuff, which I blasted through. Let's talk a little about practical stuff. See, so in some of the things we can do in terms of self-awareness, and I know that you all know these things, and if you want to add more, please feel free to add them into the chat. We can make this a dialogue. Certainly breathing is, and physiologically, we find that just taking a few deep breaths tends to calm us and changes our physiological response and the cascade of hormones that we experience to make us healthier. Just breathing. We can choose silence. We can journal. We can practice meditation, yoga, exercise. One of the things I love is, and if anybody wants this, I'd be happy to send it to Caroline and she can send it out to you all, but is to have a good emotional vocabulary and be able to check in with ourselves throughout the day. When I first started working in emotional intelligence over 20 years ago, I actually had and I do executive coaching. I had an executive leader come to me from an organization who said, emotional intelligence. He said, and I was given a talk. He said, afterwards, he said, I had no idea how you were even going to get those two words in the same sentence. They just, they don't go together. And a lot of people, particularly of a certain generation, were taught, we don't talk about emotions. And I had another executive say to me, we park our emotions at the door. Well, nice thought, maybe, but the fact is they come to us unbidden. And we can check in with ourselves throughout the day. And it helps to have a good emotional vocabulary. So what on the right, you see, what I have that I could send to Caroline is a 2-page, single-spaced, 4-column list of emotions. It's the most comprehensive I've been able to come up with. But this helps us understand a little bit more about our emotions. So for example, are we feeling anxious or are we feeling apprehensive? There's a difference. And this helps us with our self-awareness. Are we feeling enthusiastic or are we feeling exhilarated? Once again, there's a difference. And it just, the more that we can put a finer, point on what we really are feeling, the more self-awareness we develop, the more insight we have into where we are in our lives. Emotional self-regulation. We can choose positivity, and in fact, it makes our brains work better. You probably heard about, I don't know if Barbara Fredrickson talked about her broaden and build theory, but that when we are feeling positive, it broadens our perspective. We see more possibilities, we're more creative, and it builds resources for the future. Ways that we can engage in choosing positivity, what the research says is that we can practice gratitude. That you've probably heard of gratitude journals. Even taking 5 minutes before we go to sleep and just jotting down 3 things we're grateful for. And we have so much to be grateful for, even in these times. I mean, during the Depression, people didn't have food. We're still able to go to grocery stores. And, we walk in and it's like there's half an acre of fresh produce, from all over the world. We are fortunate even in these times. We can find something to be grateful for. Some families are doing a gratitude jar where they take a big mason jar and at dinner, they'll jot down something somebody did that they're grateful for. And at the end of the month, they pull out all those little slips of paper and they savor it and they enjoy it all over again. We can choose to spread hope or we can choose to spread fear. We can stop at the end of the day and say, what went well today? We all have our to-do lists. And, we look at the to-do list and there's only 2 things crossed off. Well, rather than focus on the negative, what did I accomplish? Let's take a look at what went well. Let's think about who we are, maybe journal about my best self. Who might I want to be right now to be at my best? And journal about that. Volunteering certainly brings us waves of positivity. We feel good when we practice acts of kindness or seek to support others. And we can also reflect on who or what inspired me today. All of these things brings about positivity. We can choose to focus on the negative and ruminate and spiral downward and focus there, or we can choose to say, okay, some of this is not within my control, but this is, and this is what I choose to pay attention to. And it's that 40% is a choice. So emotional self-regulation. Let's talk about empathy a little bit. And I put some do's and don'ts here. Certainly we don't want to use unhelpful language like, why don't you, so somebody comes to you and they're upset about something. And what they really need is some empathy. They need someone to listen. They don't need someone to fix, like, why don't you? Or I know how you feel, which is, we never really can know what someone else is feeling. Even if we've been through something similar, we're not the same people. Our circumstances are not. This is unhelpful language. Can't you just, it's trying to find solutions for people. And to say, can't you just, suggest that the other person, hasn't thought of this, it's simple. Why can't you just do this? Or, oh, that reminds me, which shifts the attention away from that person. Oh, that reminds me, oh, you've got pancreatic cancer? That reminds me, I need to make, an appointment with the doctor. That's not helpful. Monologues, telling people how to solve their problems, none of this is helpful. So let's talk about what is. And this has to do with listening. Listening deeply, actively, empathically. It's about listening not only for what they are saying, but even for what they're not saying. So what they're not saying is, we're listening for what do they need right now? Do they need to be acknowledged? Do they need to be validated? Do they need to be right? Do they need to be supported? Do they need to be valued? What do they need right now? And we listen for that so that we could respond a little bit more empathically. We want to honor in our listening the other person's perspectives and feelings and not judge. They have their perspectives, they have their feelings. It's not our job to change that. And we can't tell other people how to feel. They feel what they feel. It comes to them unbidden. And we need to know the difference between a shift response and a support response. And so what I mean by that kind of goes back to, that reminds me, a shift response, when someone is talking to us and something is really deeply important to them, we don't shift the conversation back to ourselves. We want to respond in a supportive way. We want to ask sensitive questions, and we want to allow the focus to rest with them, giving them our full focus and full attention. These are practices associated with empathy. One of the greatest gifts we can give another person is to listen and to truly hear what they're saying, not only hear what, but hear who they are. I don't know if we have time for a story. Caroline, I don't know.
Sure, go for it.
We do? Okay. I'm going to tell a story on myself. So we mentioned I have 5 grandchildren, and my oldest son, when he was in 9th grade, I was just coming home from work. I was working at the university, and I had my arms full of groceries. I had my briefcase over one shoulder, and my purse on the other shoulder, and he met me right at the door from the garage going into the kitchen. And he met me, and he's already a big kid at 6 feet. And he is excited, and he is telling me something. And I'm listening, and I don't want to interrupt, but these groceries are getting heavy. And the research shows that people speak an average of 150, 200 words a minute, but we can think upwards of 6, 7, 8,000 words a minute. And what's going through my mind is these groceries are getting heavy, and he's talking to me, and I got to put these groceries down. And I got to get into this briefcase. I've got some work I've got to do tonight, but before I can do that, I need to make dinner. I need to get the groceries put away. I need to make dinner. I need to clean up. I've got a meeting over at the school tonight, and he's talking, and he's talking. And my mind is working 90 million miles an hour. And he suddenly stops and he says, "Mom, you're not listening to a word I'm saying." "Oh, yes, I am, honey. Of course I am. I'm listening to everything you're saying." "No, Mom, you're not. They taught us in 9th grade speech communication class that when someone just keeps going, with their eyes kind of glazed over, in all the wrong places, they're not really listening." There I stood, my arms still full of these groceries, busted, with my shiny brand new PhD in human communication, busted by a 9th grader. People can tell. The point of the story is people can tell when you're truly listening and when you're giving them your full attention. It's so critically important to listen deeply, actively, empathically. It's one of the greatest gifts we can give to another person. So, relationship management, we can also choose to connect here in these tough times. It is harder, but we can seek out to renew long-lost friendships, strengthen family ties, stay connected, appreciate others, and let them know what you appreciate, and be specific. Treating other people with compassion and respect and dignity. Reach out and spread kindness. Practice humility, meaning listening and being open to learning from others. We don't have all the answers, but being open to learning more about them and how they perceive the world, and listening to truly understand and truly focusing on others. I like this quote from Dan Goleman. It Some people call him the father of social and emotional intelligence, which is not really quite true. He was a gifted science writer for the New York Times, and he came upon an article by John Meyer and Peter Salovey at Yale and University of New Hampshire, respectively, and academic journal. Gifted. He was a gifted science writer, and he wrote the book. He came upon these articles and wrote the book Emotional Intelligence. He is phenomenal. He had this to say, though. And I like this quote, that self-absorption in all its forms kills empathy, let alone compassion. When we focus on ourselves, our world contracts as our problems and preoccupations loom large. But when we focus on others, our world expands. Our own problems drift to the periphery of the mind and so seem smaller. And we increase our capacity for connection and compassionate action. Love that quote. So we have a choice. We can choose this. We can choose self-absorption, or we can choose empathy. And this is my favorite quote of all time. Albert Einstein, arguably one of the greatest intellects of all time, had this to say, that we should take care not to make the intellect our God. It has, of course, powerful muscles, but no personality. It cannot lead, it can only serve. So, questions?
Yes, we have a few.
Good.
One is, I want to just recap for a second and go back and also find out from you why this in particular became your life work.
Oh, wow. You mean the social and emotional intelligence? Or
yes,
the
yes, the social and emotional intelligence, yeah.
Well, so I started coaching 23 years ago. And in the beginning, people really didn't understand coaching. And in the beginning, I ended up working with executives and leaders in organizations, not only in Denver, but nationally and then ultimately internationally, who really struggled. I could see they were struggling. And I was aware and had read the books about emotional intelligence, and it was very new 23 years ago. I mean, Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, which pretty much launched everything, took the concept out of the realm of academia and made it available to the general public. His book was published in 1995, 1996, something like that. And I started coaching in 97. So, and I kept running into executives that were struggling. And I knew that they were struggling with emotional intelligence. And then later we coined the term social intelligence. That was I think Goleman published his book, Social Intelligence, in 2006. And another book came out with the same title. So it's really kind of a combination of the two. But I really got into it because I was trying to help and support my clients, because they just, 23 years ago, and still to some degree, sadly today, most of the leaders of organizations were men. I think men are socialized and conditioned not to experience their emotions. They are taught from, big boys don't cry, suck it up. They were taught to stuff and repress their emotions. And so they didn't have access to this wealth of information that emotions could provide. And so I kind of made it my mission to go learn as much as I could. I went through 4 training programs on emotional intelligence and became certified in 4 different assessment instruments. And then I developed my own. And it just, and at the Institute, we're a research and educational institute that is now worldwide. We have 1,000 coaches. We provide training to coaches on how do you coach emotional intelligence using the assessment instrument. We have over 200 pages of tools. And so that's probably a long answer, but that's how I was really trying to serve my clients.
Beautiful. Well, we have a question in the chat. Can the speaker discuss EQ and positive PP techniques in the midst of an active illness? Some of us have been experiencing COVID. Some of us have other illnesses. This particular person is asking, I've spent weeks really ill, and I'm employing all the tools that I know how. While it feels helpful in managing my mental emotional health to a degree, actively being in real physical challenges right now is simply enormously challenging. And I think that's real.
Yes.
We've also talked about that in relationship to grief, right? I know that we've had Kelly McGonigal on the call, and she said, you know, wrote the book, The Joy of Movement. And one of the things that she said is that when you exercise, right, usually what happens is the brain motivates you more, but when you're in grief, that doesn't happen. I'm wondering, when you're in an emotional or sick state, physically ill, is the same thing happening? Is everything compounded?
Yes, perfect, Caroline. Yes, and my heart goes out to the person who wrote that, and for anybody who is experiencing illness. Um, it's very real, and there's almost no getting away from it. And this is where, when the researchers talk about false positivity, this is not a way, we can't convince ourselves into feeling what we can't. And so, yes, it is definitely compounded. And my heart goes out to people who are ill. My heart goes out to people who are experiencing grief. Um, and all we can really do is be with it. We can't try to convince ourselves out of it. Never mind, you know, the choices that we can make. Kudos to the person who wrote that for trying these various techniques. I've been reading lately that COVID for some people is lasting 3 months or more. And we cannot, you know, happy ourselves out of it. It's very real. Yes, there are probably small choices we can make. It sounds like the person who wrote that is already doing those things. My heart is with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It also seems to me like what we talk about in terms of embodied work, which is what I do a lot of, is just you have to walk with yourself in that moment, accompany yourself, and your routines and your rituals become really important. As much as you can, getting the proper rest and regular meals and drinking water, even when you don't feel like it. It seems like that is like not enough, but actually that just helps regulate the system, doesn't it? And then believing and having hope that this will pass. But I think what you're saying is really important, and it's important time right now. We're going to be faced with yet another experience with schools coming and opening, and
Yes.
and it's like one thing after another. And I know Dr. Sherry Kelly is going to be talking about that. And what we have to do, it seems like, what I'm learning from these Lunch and Learn series is really have that compassion and patience.
Absolutely. And I love that you use the term compassion, because, you know, we've been talking about having compassion for others. It's also really critically important to have self-compassion.
I'm wondering if we can go over just a little bit. There's some really amazing questions in the chat. One is, what's the connection between values and empathy for others who don't share your values? How do you manage that with compassion?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm struggling a little with that myself, as we're wrapping up this election season.
Yeah.
There's still people. There's still pain in the room. And we need to remind ourselves that. That's a great question, though, because it's so easy. And we're seeing, you know, I mean, the social situation and the social structure now currently in the United States, you know, I mean, people are speaking up, and they're saying, these are my values. And it is so critically important to listen, because this is just as real to them as their emotions, as, you know, values, maybe even more so. So yes, we can have our differences, and we need to pay it, and we can also learn. And that's where the humility comes in, and be open to learning and open to hearing other perspectives, and still having compassion. And, you know, it can feel challenging. It's a behavioral self-control thing. And we can choose to respond in a way that brings more compassion, more kindness, and more love into the world.
I think what you're saying is really interesting, Laura, and it reminds me of, radical kindness. And
Yes.
the term radical, I think, is really appropriate. For me, it feels radical inside my body to feel one thing and then wait and pause and listen to another that has a different point of view. It feels like there's a radical shift that's happening almost inside me. And then there was a question about, what do you think about Mark Brackett's work and his ruler model?
I'm less familiar with that. He is at Yale, and I love his work. In preparation for this, I actually reviewed another a YouTube video that he did, and it was late at night, and I thought, I'm coming back to this. So I don't know that I can answer right
Yeah.
now.
Well, we might be able to help you out with that, because Dr. Sherry Kelly will be speaking to Mark Brackett, or speaking about Mark Brackett's work next week. And then there was one final.
I'll sign up.
Oh, great. Lots of thank yous and, yeah, lots of thank yous. And I guess the one thing that I wanted to ask you about, one thing that I was taught there were some wonderful suggestions, by the way, everything from laughter yoga to touch, to taking the VIA strengths assessment and understanding your strengths. And I'm happy to send you the chat so you can see people were doing what you suggested, which was, what are the other methods that they use or techniques,
good.
To help them. So we kind of build up our tool chest in this way. And the other one was just finding the I can. I wonder what you think about this. Like, if we're in a state where we're not feeling powerful, or our emotions are overtaking us, what can I do in that moment? And it could even be like, can I stand up? Can I sit down? Can I take a deep breath?
Deep breaths.
Right? Can I, change my outfit? Can I go for a walk? Just finding even a small moment or small choice. Can I look in a different direction? Can I say something? Whatever it is, that can lead us to I can. And then what can you do? And then what can we do? And that I can, you can, we all can help us manage that. I've used that. And then my final question is, I've heard that people would say, when you're feeling intensely an emotion, you can shift that emotion. You don't have to feel it in that moment. You can sort of acknowledge it and then come back to it. There was this whole period of time where people thought that if I don't feel this right now, I'm going to get sick. Do you know what I mean? Do you know which theories I'm talking about?
I think so, and I think Mark Brackett has a lot to say about that too, in terms of managing emotions and emotional states. And yes, we can acknowledge it. We can let that emotion come in. We can note it. We can acknowledge it. And we can say, you know what? I need to go for a walk. Or I need to take a glass of water. Or I need to just shift my surroundings. I need to walk into a different room or step outside. And yes, I'm gonna acknowledge this, and I'm gonna examine it later. Like, maybe I'm going to journal about it, take notes and journal about it to see what insights I can derive. So yes, that's a very helpful and healthy thing to do.
And let's end with your favorite quote from Einstein again. I just think that's such a wonderful one.
I love that. Yeah.
Can you go ahead and read that aloud?
Sure. That we should take care not to make the intellect our God. It has, of course, powerful muscles, but no personality. It cannot lead, it can only serve.
And thank you so much for your service,
for
you coming to talk to us about this very important topic, which I think is confusing for many of us, all of us as humans, to be swept away by emotion and to know what to do with it is, I think, a lifelong challenge.
Yes, yeah. It is a challenge.
Challenge. So thank you for shedding some light and your beauty and your love of appreciations of beauty and excellence. I can see that and for spending time with us and sharing with us your knowledge. Really appreciate it. Wave bye, everybody. We'll see you on Thursday. We're going to be talking about the healing power of pets. And this is not something to miss. You really want to come to this story. Audrey is amazing. She's going to be telling us her story, and it's one of triumph and using happiness in times of great loss and tragedy, and how she has overcome that, and also how animals have helped with that journey. So please tune in. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe, well, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Caroline. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Phoebe.